So the ministry says that needs are not goals and accommodations. They are the important and very personal details beyond that identification or diagnosis or label. They tell the teacher in what ways is this student challenged. They provide information that's pertinent to the school, and it's especially important to look at how those needs can be met in regular class. The unique detail is important. The diagnosis itself, obviously there are many students with the same diagnosis, the same exceptionality, but students with the same label do not all have the very same needs. Some of the IEP samples and IEPs that I see, it may be the one sitting in front of you, makes it look as if the students who have the same label have the same needs. And that means that there will be pressure to congregate them and segregate them in special class placements. So it's important to help the school understand precisely why this student requires support. It's important to talk about fears or triggers, because it'll be important that we move from this step to the moving on to accommodations. And if the exact issues challenges that a student faces, the exact ways they're needy are written down, then no one can say that that wasn't clear and that there weren't ways, therefore, to avoid those triggers. So it can be an important issue around safe schools considerations, that if needs are clearly outlined in an IEP, then a student is entitled not to be suspended and expelled. So the strengths and needs go together in the learning profile, and how they combine is interesting. So here's a couple of examples. A student wouldn't have trouble with changes in routine if she didn't have a good memory. It's how that combines. What if the student finds change difficult and can't ask questions about what's happening next? Are there sensory or physical explanations for some challenges? A student who finds fluorescent lights painful, for example, that we need to know that. And we need to give credit for the way the student has compensated in terms of strengths, because he has some big life challenges. So moving on to the next section of the IEP is the current level of achievement. So again, thinking about the IEP as a journey, you need to start. If you're going to use MapQuest or GPS, you need to put in your starting point. So this is point A. The goals and expectations will be point B. We need a starting point or we're never going to get there. We're not going to be able to use this tool. The current level of achievement is based on an educational assessment. Psychological assessment is not what is pertinent here. So the teacher knows, the teacher gets to know the student and understands what skills have already been demonstrated, what last year's report card said, how that relates to the Ontario curriculum grade levels. Teachers talk about curriculum as a scaffold, that it helps you climb up the building of education. We need to be clear about what the student now knows, has already demonstrated in all subjects, and sometimes that comes from a portfolio assessment where there are samples of the student's work. And you see how all of this it can actually be way more important as a starting point for the teacher than an IQ score would be. The strengths can also go here, and it's just really a little hint that if the school isn't finding room for some details about strengths, it might be possible to put some information, for example, in computer programming, what the student can already do, what the student does at home in terms of using a mouse and accessing websites and that sort of thing. The starting point, this point A, the current level of achievement, is meant to provide clear communication that this student, if this student is not working at grade level. So that, from an inclusion point of view, that can be disheartening for the student to read his own IEP and see that he's maybe in grade 12 but working at a grade 1 or 2 level in terms of literacy skills. The ministry, this is where the rock and a hard place comes, because the ministry requires an IEP to be clear about that, and then everyone to be clear that they know where the student fits on the Ontario curriculum scaffold, but it can be disheartening, so you need to be prepared for that. Next then, point point B of this journey, point A being the current level, now we get to the goal setting. So annual goals are for the year or the semester. Learning expectations are set for the term and should be revised after each report card. The ministry wants an IEP to clearly set goals and communicate these outcomes, which they want to be objective and measurable. The problem is that sometimes objective and measurable IEPs are not really meaningful and relevant to that big journey that the student wants to take. And there may be unintended consequences. So an objective and measurable learning expectation, for example, would be to move from being able to do 3-piece puzzles to doing 4-piece puzzles. But that may not really open many doors or get the student in the direction he wants to be, and he may find it may translate into a lot of time spent every day with puzzles. So this is where we need to listen to the student and think. IEPs can't cover every single thing that happens. They're not lesson plans. They're not a course of study, but they're to zero in on some key priorities. So let's pick those priorities, choose those priorities with the student's preferences in mind and the big direction that the student wants each piece of his education to be moving towards. We have to think, what would Bon Jovi say about this IEP? Is it really the student's life, and is it getting him where he wants to be? So IEPs pertain to 3 kinds of things. One is subjects may be accommodated only, and the ministry explains that that means that the student is working at grade level. And and that the accommodation should be provided before you ever prejudge that a student cannot work at grade level. The second type of level is modified subjects, which means that the expectations in the IEP are taken from anywhere but within the Ontario curriculum. And in each modified subject has its own section of the IEP. So it could be partway through grade level, but it can mean above grade level, it can mean well below grade level. And that high school research project that was completed 2 years ago in Ontario was intentionally about students, schools where students there may be a very wide curriculum gap, but students in that research were in advanced level subjects in high school of their choice, subjects they've chosen, and but they may be working well below in primary literacy levels or math levels, but still modified. Alternative expectations are from nowhere in the Ontario curriculum, and personally I think they don't head anywhere in terms of academics. They would be those kinds of goals that are called life skills, compliance, the therapy goals, and it's a slippery slope, because where there are those kinds of alternative expectations in an IEP, it's a strong statement to the classroom teacher for a student in a regular class that perhaps a special ed teacher has more expertise to help the student reach the goals. It's a temptation to remove the student from the regular classroom because other students in regular classroom are not working on those goals. Where do you find students working on those goals? In the little room down the hall or in the segregated classroom. So when I look uniquely at a student's IEP, I ask the question, can these alternative expectations be removed? And it's often easier to remove some than to add some. It puts less energy on, it doesn't scatter energies quite so much, because life skills expectations can be, well, here's an example actually. Here's an example of the ministry's, from the ministry's sample IEPs. This is for a secondary student with autism. And you see that the right-hand box is checked for all 6 of the student subjects. They're all alternative, so nothing to do with the regular curriculum. And I would say that number 3, leisure skills. The example that I think of when I think of that is students in high school doing crafts, and I was so amazed that one of the crafts they were doing was corking, just working with wool and little nails, and I never figured what you used those things for when you made them. So I'm not sure that that sort of expectation of leisure skills is what a student really thinks he's going to school for, how that really fits with his or her plan for the future. The world of work is here, expectation number 4, and the danger would be that this is group outings, for example, where students go, they don't use the bus, they don't handle money, they don't get to choose, but there's a whole group of students with disabilities out in a store somewhere, and it's not individualized to the extent it might be. That the time for gaining some of those skills might be after school, with some extra support coming to the family. Self-help can mean hand-over-hand hairbrushing. It can mean that the student spends a lot of time out of classroom in the washroom. And behavioral goals are often about compliance. One that I saw which really chilled me was the students' expectation for this reporting period was that they would comply with all adult requests, which is a pretty tall order and a pretty scary thing to expect of a student who's very vulnerable. So IEPs are accommodation plans. The energy should go into creating excellent accommodations and to accommodate the student before you determine that he or she can't meet Ontario curriculum goals. The accommodations outline those programs and services that are that legally enforceable promise that the IEP legislation talks about. Where you're promoting universal access, for example, even just something like a door opener on a school door means that that support will be there for a lot of people. A lot of people will benefit from that, teachers carrying books and moving carts with equipment and so on, and that there won't need to be staffing supports. It's about individual accommodation and differentiating, not prejudging that a student learn, but aiming higher, not making dangerous assumptions that they will never do something. It's important too that the accommodations be listed in the IEP if the student is going to do provincial tests that are called EQAO standard tests. And students must pass the grade 10 test in order to graduate high school, or they must try the test in order to have an alternative literacy numeracy class. But EQA stipulates which accommodations can be provided in those standardized tests, but those particular accommodations must be listed in the student's IEP in order to be available during EQAO testing. Again, it's about avoiding segregation by providing supports in the regular class so the student doesn't have to leave.